The first bite told them everything. German soldiers had chewed through years of scarcity. On the Eastern Front, their rations shrank to crusts. 150 grams of bread, black and hard, often stretched with sawdust or ground acorns. Soup was hot water tinted with turnip or beet, sometimes a sliver of horse meat if luck allowed. They learned to scrape fat from tins, to suck marrow from bones, to trick their stomachs with bitter coffee brewed from roasted barley. Hunger became routine. It shaped their bodies, their tempers, even their dreams. Then they were captured, and the nightmare flipped inside out. The first morning in an American camp was the most disorienting. Guards herded them into a mess hall that smelled of frying meat. Eggs cracked on griddles, yolks sizzling in butter, sausages hissed, oatmeal steamed in vats so wide you could bathe in them. Prisoners stood frozen, trays in hand, staring. When the line moved, they shuffled forward in disbelief. One soldier wrote later, "I thought they would hand me the usual scrap, a crust, a potato peel. Instead, I received bread, white bread, thickly buttered, a piece so large I could not finish it. It was more than I had eaten in 2 days on the front." The bread alone was insult enough. In Germany, white bread had vanished from civilian tables years before. Rye, dark and heavy, was the staple, and even that was rationed to crumbs. Housewives lined up for hours for loaves that crumbled like stone. Children carried slices like treasures. To walk into a camp as a prisoner and find baskets of white bread piled high, it felt like mockery. And then came the butter, thick, creamy, spread so generously it oozed over the edges. Butter in Germany was rationed to grams. Here it was slathered as if nobody cared. A prisoner stared at his portion until the guard barked, "Move on!" He moved, but his eyes never left the gleam of yellow. Breakfast went further. Sausages, crisp and hot. Oatmeal with sugar sprinkled on top. Milk poured into tin cups, cold and frothy. Many prisoners hesitated to drink, convinced it was a trick. One lifted his cup, tasted, and felt his throat tighten. He remembered the last time he'd had fresh milk, 2 years earlier when his child had been allowed a small ration. He put the cup down and wept. And then, the bottle. Dark glass, curved lines, cold beads of condensation clinging to the surface. Coca-Cola. The shape was unlike anything they knew. The cap hissed as it popped, fizz rushing to the top. The sound alone stunned them. Soda? In wartime? Impossible. Sugar had vanished from German homes years earlier. Children licked spoons coated with syrup and called it candy. Families hoarded every cube as if it were gold. Yet here the enemy poured sugar into vats, turned it into sweet liquid, sealed it in glass, and handed it out to captives. One prisoner later admitted, "I held it like a relic. We had marched on empty stomachs, fought on dry rations, and here was sweetness in a bottle. I thought it was a joke. Then I drank, and I realized it was real." Coca-Cola wasn't just a drink. It was a symbol. Back in 1941, the company had promised that every American soldier, anywhere in the world, could buy a bottle for 5 cents. To deliver, they built bottling plants near every front: North Africa, Italy, France, even remote islands in the Pacific. By 1945, production was approaching 1 billion bottles annually. To German eyes, that number was beyond comprehension. 1 billion? They struggled to feed cities, and America was drowning its men in soda. Prisoners debated endlessly. How could the enemy waste sugar like this in wartime? One scoffed, "It's propaganda. They give us a taste, then stop." Another shook his head, watching crates roll in day after day. "Propaganda doesn't hiss when you open it," he muttered, raising his bottle. The irony was unbearable. Hitler had mocked America as weak, decadent, incapable of endurance. Nazi propaganda painted it as a mongrel nation of jazz, chewing gum, and half-breeds, soft and unserious. And yet here, in the middle of war, the prisoners chewed steak, buttered bread, and washed it down with soda. If this was weakness, they wondered, what did strength look like? The question echoed through the barracks. Men argued late into the night, their voices low so guards wouldn't overhear. Some insisted it was a trick, a temporary show of wealth. Others thought it was a strategy to break morale. But the weeks turned into months and nothing changed. The bread stayed white. The butter stayed thick. The bottles of Coca-Cola kept hissing open, one after another. One soldier hoarded his empties, hiding them under his bunk. He couldn't explain why. Maybe as proof, maybe as talismans. Another smashed his in rage, glass scattering across the floor. Both men admitted the same truth. They were living in a world where the impossible had become routine. Numbers reinforced the impression. The American Army issued its men rations totaling 3,200 to 3,600 calories daily. Meat, chocolate, biscuits, coffee. At the same time, German civilians survived on half that, often less. In besieged cities like Breslau, bread rations fell to 50 grams per day. In the camps, bread baskets never emptied. A German officer later wrote, "We understood then. They fought with abundance. We fought with hunger. It was no contest." Evenings added another twist. The camp sometimes screened films, American comedies, musicals, cartoons. Imagine the scene. Men who had fought in Stalingrad or Normandy, now sitting cross-legged, bottles of soda in hand, laughing at Charlie Chaplin. Some laughed genuinely. Others laughed bitterly. One confessed later, "I hated myself for laughing. My family was hiding in cellars. I was laughing at a clown with a full stomach." The Coca-Cola bottle became more than a drink. It became a weapon, a psychological one. The hiss of the cap was louder than speeches. The sweetness on the tongue was sharper than propaganda. It said, "We have so much, we can waste it on you." And the message landed. Some resisted. One prisoner refused to drink Coca-Cola, declaring it an insult. He lasted 2 days before caving in. Hunger, thirst, and curiosity broke him. Another rationed his bread, hiding half under his bunk, convinced the abundance would end. After weeks, he gave up. The bread never stopped coming. In time, prisoners began to measure their days not by hours, but by meals. Breakfast, lunch, dinner. The rhythm was steady, reliable, impossible. The war outside might rage in chaos, but inside the camps, the schedule never broke. Food arrived on time. Soda bottles clinked in crates. Ice cream machines hummed. Order, not scarcity, ruled their lives. The more they ate, the heavier the question grew. How could one country fight across oceans, build weapons by the tens of thousands, and still pour sugar into glass for its prisoners? The guards never answered. They didn't need to. The food answered for them. The bell rang at 7. Not a siren, not an alarm, just a clang, steady as a clock. Prisoners lined up with trays, expecting scraps. Instead, the mess hall hit them like artillery. Eggs cracked by the hundreds. Sausages spat grease on griddles wide as doors. Oatmeal bubbled in vats that could drown a man. White bread stacked in baskets like sandbags against hunger. A German whispered, "This is not captivity. This is theater." Breakfast alone was a statistic. 3,000 calories every day, no delay. At the same moment in Germany, rations for civilians hovered at 1,200. The difference was not arithmetic. It was humiliation. One officer summed it up. War was chaos. America served order on a plate. Trucks rolled them into the fields, rows of corn that swallowed the horizon. Tomato plants bent under weight, apple trees dropping fruit like rain. Prisoners bent and picked, hands stained green, baskets filling faster than thoughts. One farmer poured milk straight from a churn into tin cups. Froth spilled down beards. German children back home received half a liter per week. Here, men drank liters in a day. American dairies produced more than 100 billion pounds of milk annually. A prisoner spat, "This is not a farm, this is a weapon." Apple orchards were worse. Bins filled until wood groaned. A soldier bit into a red apple, juice running down his chin. He muttered, "We fought for crusts. Here apples fall like stones." He finished the fruit, core and all, then silence. The fruit was sweeter than victory. Factories sharpened the lesson. Conveyor belts clattered with tomatoes. Steam hissed. Cans snapped shut at hundreds per minute. Chicago packing houses slaughtered 10,000 hogs a day. A prisoner wrote later, "In Germany, we queued for scraps. Here, cans rolled like water, endless. Evenings brought shadows on a sheet. The projector hummed. Charlie Chaplin twirled his cane. Germans sat cross-legged, Coca-Cola bottles sweating in their hands. Some laughed with joy, others with guilt. One wrote later, "My family hid in cellars. I laughed at a clown with sugar on my tongue." Music hit next. Jazz, swing, crooners. Glenn Miller, Benny Goodman. Feet tapped before pride caught up. A guard smirked, "You boys march better to jazz than to drums." The irony was too sharp to answer. The camp store mocked them worst of all. Candy bars, pies, ice cream. Prisoners earned 80 cents a day, enough to buy sweetness. One muttered, "This machine works harder than our generals." He wasn't smiling. Letters betrayed the truth in code. "I am healthy." Families read, "There is food." "The bread is white." Families gasped. Rumors spread in Germany. Men in America gained weight. Mothers whispered it in bread lines. Soldiers denied it, then wondered. Pride cracked. One man swore off Coca-Cola. 3 days later, thirst broke him. Another hoarded bread under his bunk, convinced tomorrow it would end. After weeks, he gave up. The bread never stopped. Some scenes refused to fade. A prisoner watched American children outside a barn. They swung bats, licked lollipops, laughed. He thought of his own under blackout curtains. Another stood in a cannery, realizing what his family called a year's supply rolled past in an afternoon. He said nothing, just stared, and guilt grew heavier than hunger. To eat sausage while families starved, it twisted the stomach worse than emptiness ever had. But hunger always wins. The camp preached without sermons. Bread, pie, milk, soda, they were verses louder than speeches. One prisoner said, "We were told America was weak, but we were drowned in proof of its strength." By late 1944, the debate was over. The abundance was not a trick. It was machinery, too vast to comprehend. Kansas harvested more wheat than nations could consume. Milk rivers filled tanks. The ice cream machine whirred like an engine of war. And the question gnawed at every bunk. How could a nation fight across oceans, build fleets and bombers, and still hand ice cream to its captives? No one answered. They just ate and wondered. The first sound was not a siren, not gunfire, but steel wheels screaming on rails. Trains thundered past the fields where prisoners worked, wagons rattling, grain pouring like rivers of gold through cracks in the hoppers. Every few minutes, another convoy shrieked by, loaded with crates stacked to the roof. To American guards, it was background noise. To German soldiers, it was blasphemy. Back home, silence haunted rail yards. Trains stood idle, bombed-out bridges blocking their path, locomotives starved of coal. Here the rails sang with endless motion. A prisoner leaned on his hoe, eyes locked on a passing train. Canvas covers flapped in the wind, revealing sacks stamped with U.S. Army Quartermaster Corps. Wheat, rice, flour, cargo enough to feed whole cities. His lips moved soundlessly, counting wagons. He gave up after 40. The convoy didn't end. At night in the barracks, they argued about numbers. Some swore a single train carried more food than Germany could deliver to an entire army group in a month. Others said it was exaggeration. But each day the trains kept coming, as steady as the sun. If rails could kill, one prisoner muttered, America would not need soldiers. Canneries amplified the shock. The first step inside was like stepping into a furnace of sound. Belts clattered, kettles roared, knives chopped with mechanical rhythm. Steam hissed so loud it drowned thought. Beef slid down chutes into boiling vats. Vegetables cascaded like waterfalls. Cans rattled, lids slammed shut, cases stacked until the floor trembled. A German machinist among the prisoners stared, transfixed. He had worked in a factory in Bremen, where a power cut could halt production for days, where shortages of tin or coal left workers standing idle. Here no stoppage existed. The belts never paused, not even for breath. He whispered, "This is not a factory. This is weather. It falls like rain." By 1944, America produced close to 1 billion cans of meat. 1 billion. The number echoed like thunder in the barracks. German civilians at home scraped by on watery soups, 100-200 calories a day at best. In camps, thousands of miles away, prisoners spooned beef stew thick with potatoes. One man stared into his bowl, ashamed. His wife boiled bones for broth. He swallowed anyway. Hunger always wins. Sugar mocked them most. Trains unloaded sacks by the ton, stacked so high the piles resembled snowdrifts. Prisoners bent their backs, carrying weight heavier than themselves. In Germany, sugar ration cards measured teaspoons. A child might get a cube once a week. Here, mountains of white crystals glistened in the sunlight, shoveled into vats for soda. At the end of the day's labor, guards handed each prisoner a bottle made from the very sugar they had carried. Dark glass, sweating in the heat, cap hissing as it popped. One German spat, "This is mockery." Then he drank. The fizz drowned his pride. Inside bottling plants, rhythm became torture. Glass rattled like wind chimes, caps snapped, machines groaned, cases climbed higher and higher until the ceiling vanished behind them. To Germans raised on scarcity, it was not industry. It was sorcery, turning sugar into sweetness, excess into glass, air into laughter. Some men saved their bottles as relics, hiding them under bunks. Others smashed them against concrete in rage, shards scattering like broken faith. But none could forget the sound. Clink, hiss, pop, over and over like a drumbeat of surrender. Newsreels rubbed salt in the wound. Once a week, prisoners watched grain silos overflowing, shipyards launching vessels, women in coveralls driving rivets into bomber wings. At first, laughter rippled, women building planes. Then the laughter died. The scale was undeniable. At home, boys fought with rifles carved from wood. Here, mothers built B-17s while children ate ice cream. An officer muttered, "We were not beaten in battle. We were drowned in bread and Coca-Cola." The phrase stuck, whispered from bunk to bunk until it became a grim proverb. Milk was worse than sugar. Trucks rumbled into camp with steel tanks sloshing white. Prisoners lined up with tin cups, expecting the usual thin soup. Instead, valves hissed and milk spilled cold and frothy into their hands. Some drank greedily, foam streaking their lips. Others froze, staring as if it were poison. In Germany, children rationed half a liter per week. Here, prisoners swallowed liters in a single morning. One man tipped his cup back and shut his eyes. The taste jolted him. He remembered his son's birthday 2 years before, when his wife had traded a month's coupons for a single pint. They had split it into 4 glasses, each barely a sip. Now in captivity, he drank more in seconds than his family had seen in months. He lowered the cup, trembling. "This is not food," he muttered. "This is humiliation." Numbers stalked the barracks. Dairies in America produced over 100 billion pounds of milk annually. The figures sounded like myth. But prisoners saw the proof in every cup. They began measuring days not by hours but by liters, 2 at breakfast, another at supper, more hidden in canteens. The abundance was terrifying. Bread ovens told the same story. In one camp, prisoners were assigned to help bakers. Ovens glowed red, belching heat. Dough slid in by the cartload, rows of loaves swelling golden. Every 20 minutes, doors burst open, spilling light and the smell of yeast. Hundreds of loaves spilled onto racks, more than a German town might see in a week. A baker handed one prisoner a knife. "Slice," he said. The German cut, slices falling thick and soft. He thought of his mother in Cologne, slicing one crust into 4, each piece like treasure. He laughed once, not with joy but disbelief. "This oven mocks us," he whispered. At roll call, baskets overflowed with bread. Guards barely glanced as loaves were handed out. To Americans, bread was routine. To Germans, it was sorcery, turning flour into infinity. Some ate until their stomachs cramped. Others tucked slices into pockets, unable to trust abundance. Weeks later, the habit died. Bread never stopped. Quiet moments cut deeper than statistics. One prisoner stood in a dairy barn watching milk gush into tanks. The smell was sharp, alive. He thought of blackout curtains, of sirens, of his children whispering in cellars. He pressed his forehead to the cold metal, eyes closed. He stayed until a guard shoved him away. Another wandered into a storage shed stacked with canned peaches. He touched a tin, cold under his fingers. Then another, hundreds, thousands. Enough fruit to sweeten winters for entire towns. He thought of his wife boiling weeds into broth. He pressed his hand flat against the metal and whispered, "She will never believe me." Evenings carried the same rhythm. Food, then movies. Newsreels showed shipyards launching Liberty ships at 1 per week. Factories roaring 24 hours. Children licking ice cream cones on summer streets. Germans watched in silence. The projector clacked, light flickered, but no one laughed. The scale left no room. Some nights, the newsreels cut to soldiers overseas, bottles of Coca-Cola in hand, smiling, helmets tilted back. The same bottles prisoners held. The message was plain. America had so much it gave the same sweetness to its own men at the front and to its enemies behind barbed wire. Rumors hardened into belief. Kansas wheat could feed Europe. Chicago's stockyards slaughtered more hogs in a week than Germany could in a month. Packing houses ran night and day, smoke rising like a second sky. Every statistic became a blade. A German officer said later, "We searched for limits. We found none. The trains, the ovens, the bottles, they never stopped. America seemed endless." Pride cracked under the weight. One man smashed his empty bottle against the wall, shards scattering. Another hid his under a mattress, proof that it existed. A third tried to refuse meals, vowing to fast until release. He lasted 2 days before collapsing. Guards carried him to the mess hall. Hunger always wins. The irony became unbearable. Hitler had promised America was weak, soft, incapable of sacrifice. Yet here behind wire, men chewed beef, tore bread, gulped milk, and washed it down with soda. If this was weakness, they whispered, what did strength look like? That question hung in the air like smoke. By autumn 1944, the rhythm was fixed. Trains screamed past the camp, ovens roared, bottling plants hissed. Germans stopped counting wagons, stopped staring at bread baskets. The impossible had become routine, and routine was worse than shock. Work details still cut the deepest. Some were sent to grain elevators, towers of steel rising higher than cathedrals, filled with wheat that poured like rivers when the hatches opened. Prisoners stood on catwalks, watching golden avalanches roar into trucks below. One muttered, "This is not storage. This is a mountain, and they eat it." Others shoveled coal into boilers that powered canneries. The heat blistered their skin, but the belts never slowed. Machines rattled like thunder, cans clanged like gunfire. At night, they collapsed into bunks, ears still ringing with the rhythm of production. In Germany, factories starved for fuel. Here, furnaces drank endlessly. The contrast gnawed at them. Letters home told the story in code. "I am healthy." Families read, "He eats." "We have milk." Families wept. One wife whispered in a bread line, "My husband drinks milk every day. My children lick pots." Rumors spread until even party officials admitted. Prisoners in America were living better than civilians at home. Inside the barracks, arguments raged. Was it propaganda? A trick? A weapon more subtle than bullets? Some insisted it was temporary, that the flood would dry up. Others pointed to the trains, the ovens, the bottles, the newsreels. "The trick," one said, "is that there is no trick." The Coca-Cola bottle became a symbol heavier than steel. Guards handed them out casually, caps hissing, fizz rising. Prisoners held them like relics. Some swore they would tell their children one day. Yes, it was real. In captivity, I drank sweetness. Others smashed the glass, unable to endure the mockery. But whether kept or broken, the meaning remained. Even the smallest details cut. One night, a prisoner found a crate of Hershey bars in a storeroom. He held the chocolate, still wrapped, and remembered his daughter's face when sugar rations ended. He put the bar back and walked away, shaking. Another man bit into one and cried silently, ashamed at the taste. The camp cinema added insult to injury. Musicals flashed across the screen, dancers spinning in sequins, songs about love, laughter spilling into the dark. Men sat with soda bottles in their hands, watching a country so rich it could sing in wartime. A prisoner whispered, "We bombed their cities. They dance anyway." Numbers reinforced despair. America harvested enough wheat in Kansas alone to feed all of occupied Europe. Chicago slaughtered 10,000 hogs per day. One bottling line sealed 40,000 Coca-Cola bottles in a shift. Each fact was another nail, another reminder. The enemy did not fight hunger. And still the question grew heavier. How could a nation fight across 2 oceans, launch fleets and bombers daily, and still flood its camps with abundance? How could prisoners eat beef while their families starved? How could ice cream and cartoons flow while cities in Germany burned? No one answered. They only ate and wondered. Years later, many remembered not the guards, not the fences, but the food. The smell of bread, the taste of milk, the hiss of Coca-Cola. Symbols sharper than barbed wire. One wrote, "We were not defeated by soldiers. We were defeated by breakfast." Evenings were a second battlefield. When the sun dropped and work details ended, guards dragged a white sheet between poles in the yard. A projector clicked to life. Light cut the darkness, and suddenly America performed. Charlie Chaplin danced, twirled, stumbled. Laurel and Hardy bickered, fell, broke furniture. Prisoners sat cross-legged in rows, bottles of soda sweating in their hands. Some laughed honestly, shoulders shaking, teeth flashing. Others laughed bitterly, the sound catching in their throats. One officer confessed later, "My wife was crouching in cellars. I sat with Coca-Cola and comedies. I hated myself for laughing." The projector played more than jokes. Musicals spilled across the sheet, dancers spinning in sequins, brass blaring, songs of joy. To Germans raised on marches, it was alien, too bright, too excessive. Yet their feet tapped anyway. One guard smirked. "You boys march better to jazz than to drums." And then the radio. Voices floated through static. Glenn Miller, Benny Goodman, crooners who bent words until they glowed. Prisoners lay on bunks, listening to rhythms that pulled their bodies before their minds allowed. One muttered, "We were raised on commands. This is seduction." The irony was cruel. Nazi propaganda had called America decadent, corrupted by jazz, soft with chewing gum and cinema. Yet here, in captivity, that decadence tasted like power. Jazz filled bellies as much as bread. Laughter bent pride faster than hunger ever had. The canteen sharpened the insult. Coupons from farm work bought more than pie. Shelves stacked with candy bars, cigarettes, shaving cream. One prisoner held a Hershey bar in his hand, staring at the wrapper. He thought of his daughter in Bremen, her teeth stained from beet syrup, never knowing real chocolate. He slid the bar back onto the shelf, unable to bite. Another tore one open and chewed furiously, tears streaking his face. Ice cream whirred constantly. The machine churned day and night, humming louder than the barracks. Cones appeared even in winter, prisoners licking frost while families back home chewed bark. One muttered darkly, "This machine works harder than our generals." Letters home carried codes. "I am healthy." Families read, "Food." "We have milk." Families read, "Abundance." Some prisoners admitted shame in ink, veiled in phrases. Others avoided it, afraid the truth would crush their wives and children. Rumors spread anyway. Women in bread lines whispered, "The men in America eat better than we do." One farmer told a prisoner directly, "You eat well here, don't you?" The German swallowed hard. He wanted to deny it. Instead, he nodded once, ashamed. The encounters with civilians were worse. On work details, farmers' wives sometimes offered lemonade, cookies, even small gifts. Children watched from porches, laughing, chasing each other through grass. Germans turned away, unable to look. A prisoner muttered, "My children crouch in cellars. Theirs play tag in sunlight." The lights cut deepest. Driving through towns at dusk, prisoners stared at shop windows glowing bright. Street lamps burned without fear. Neon signs flashed. Even in wartime, storefronts promised tomorrow. Shoes, radios, Coca-Cola. In Germany, blackout curtains smothered every window. A candle flame risked punishment. Here, light spilled into the night without apology. One officer pressed his forehead to the truck's window, eyes wide. "We were told America was weak," he said later. But weakness does not glow in the dark. Inside the barracks, debates raged. Was it propaganda? A play staged for their benefit? Some argued yes, too much, too convenient. Others shook their heads. Propaganda fades. Bread baskets don't. Pie crusts don't. Soda caps don't. One officer muttered the phrase that spread like a curse. "The trick is that there is no trick." And with that came guilt. Prisoners wrote that their bellies were full, their faces rounder. Some gained weight. They chewed steak while wives stretched rations, drank milk while children sipped beet syrup, laughed at comedies while cities burned. The shame twisted their stomachs worse than hunger ever had. Yet every morning, They lined up again for eggs, butter, white bread. Hunger always wins. The contradiction cut daily. They were enemies, yet trusted with farm tools, paid wages, handed pie. They had bombed cities, shot at convoys, burned villages, yet drank Coca-Cola and smoked American cigarettes. A prisoner whispered late at night, "They do not fear us." That is strength. By the winter of 1944, men returned from work, details sunburned, pockets jingling with coupons, laughter on their lips. They argued about baseball games they didn't understand, sang swing tunes under their breath, and dreamed of pie. They were still prisoners, but the wire blurred. It felt less like a cage, more like a frame around a picture too vast to escape. And always, the question loomed larger. How could a nation fight across oceans, launch fleets, bomb cities, and still hand ice cream to its captives? No answer came. Only another slice of pie. Evenings in the camp unfolded with a rhythm no German expected. The projector buzzed, reels clattered, and a white sheet stretched between poles became a window into another world. Cartoons, comedies, musicals. Charlie Chaplin stumbled and twirled. Dancers spun under glittering lights. Trumpets blared. Germans sat cross-legged, soda bottles sweating in their hands. Some laughed with abandon, shoulders shaking. Others laughed bitterly, shame mixing with sweetness on their tongues. One soldier wrote later, "My family hid in cellars. I sat with Coca-Cola and laughed at a clown." The clash was unbearable. Back home, sirens screamed, bombs fell, walls cracked. Here, on the same planet, prisoners watched Technicolor smiles while drinking sugar. If it was propaganda, it worked without speeches. Music hit harder still. Radios hummed with swing, jazz, crooners. Glenn Miller's trombone slid. Benny Goodman's clarinet soared, voices alive with rhythm. Germans raised on martial marches, found their feet tapping against their will. A guard grinned. "You march better to jazz than to drums." The jab stung because it was true. Some prisoners swore never to tap again, pride burning hotter than rhythm. Most failed. The beat was too strong. Even men who had never danced swayed unconsciously. A reminder that joy could be mechanical, not rationed. The camp canteen turned coupons into temptation. Soap and tobacco, yes, but also candy bars, ice cream, pies thick with cherries or apples. A man saved for weeks, then bought a single Hershey bar. He held it like relic, unwrapped it slowly, broke one square. He thought of his daughter licking pots for sugar. He bit once, chewed, then cried silently. Another laughed and devoured the bar in seconds. Guilt swallowed with sweetness, pride fractured. One prisoner declared he would never drink Coca-Cola. He lasted 3 days before thirst and curiosity broke him. Another hoarded bread, convinced the flood would dry. Weeks later, he gave up. The bread never ended. A third fasted, vowing to resist abundance until release. He collapsed after 2 days and was carried to the mess hall. Hunger always wins. Yet abundance did not heal. It mocked. At work sites, American farmers sometimes spoke casually with prisoners. A farmer offered a cigarette, lit it, and asked in broken German if the man had family. The prisoner nodded, thinking of his wife in ration lines. The farmer nodded back and said nothing more. The silence was heavier than insult. In orchards, American children watched curiously as Germans picked fruit. A boy tossed a baseball, laughed when it rolled near a prisoner, gestured for him to throw it back. The German picked it up, heavy and stitched, unlike anything from home. He threw. The boy cheered. For a moment, war dissolved. Then it returned sharper than ever. Letters carried the quiet tragedy. "I am healthy," men wrote. Families read, "He eats. The bread is white." Families gasped. Mothers whispered in queues, "Our husbands drink milk. We lick empty pots." Some believed, others cursed it as rumor, but all knew hunger. The shame in camp was worse than the hunger had been. In the barracks, debates grew bitter. Was this kindness, strategy, or arrogance? One insisted it was propaganda. Another shook his head. Propaganda doesn't hiss when you open it. A third muttered, "The real message is that they don't even notice." That thought was worse than speeches. Newsreels hammered it home. Shipyards launched Liberty ships weekly, waves crashing against hulls fresh from the slipway. Women swung rivet guns, sparks showering. Children licked ice cream on summer sidewalks. Germans stared at the flickering screen, silent. The projector whirred, but no one laughed. "They fight with steel and sugar," one muttered. "We fight with scraps." And yet the strangest weapon was trust. Guards often left prisoners in orchards or fields with little watch. Few tried to escape. Where would they run? Into endless corn, into cities glowing with neon, into a land where food fell like rain. To flee was not escape. It was surrender to infinity. One officer wrote later, "The lesson was not only in bread or soda. It was in trust. They trusted us enough to be careless. We stayed because they were strong enough to let us go." By the winter of 1944, men returned from work, details sunburned, pockets jingling with coupons, bellies full. They carried pies back to barracks, argued about baseball they barely understood, tapped feet to radios. They were still prisoners, but the wire felt less like a cage and more like a picture frame. Inside was a world they had never imagined. And always the same question gnawed. How could a nation fight across oceans, drop fleets of bombers daily, and still hand ice cream to its captives? The pies disappeared. The music faded. But the question remained. The wire could not hold out the news. Guards carried newspapers under their arms, left them on benches, even used them to light cigarettes. Headlines glared in bold black. Allied bombers over Berlin. Another carrier launched in Newport. Record wheat harvest in Kansas. Prisoners craned their necks, catching fragments. They pieced together a story more terrifying than barbed wire. America was not only feeding them, it was feeding the world. Letters told the same tale. Families wrote from Hamburg, Dresden, Cologne. The nights are longer. The sirens never stop. One wife scrawled, "We eat turnip bread. The children cry." Prisoners folded the paper, unable to answer. On their tables, milk still foamed in cups, bread still steamed, Coca-Cola still hissed. The contrast was unbearable. Rumors raced faster than trains. Some said America built 50,000 bombers in a year. Others swore it was 100,000. A machinist prisoner, once proud of German industry, shook his head. "They build like we breathe." The figures blurred, but the meaning was clear. Scale was the true weapon. Work details brought confirmation. In towns, prisoners glimpsed billboards glowing at night. Coca-Cola ads, movie posters, neon drugstore signs. Even in wartime, light spilled freely. Back home, blackout curtains suffocated windows, cracks punished with fines. Here, glass shone bright, promising tomorrow. One man whispered, "We fight in darkness. They live in daylight." In fields, farmers spoke casually, treating prisoners like laborers, not enemies. "Pick faster," one called, waving. His children ran barefoot, eating apples until juice smeared their faces. Germans bent and filled baskets, throats tight. The enemy's children grew fat on fruit. Theirs hid in cellars, stomachs hollow. The bitterness deepened when prisoners realized their labor did not save America. It barely dented abundance. They picked tomatoes until their arms ached, yet vines still sagged heavy. They chopped trees all day, yet forests stretched endless. One sighed, "We are not feeding America. We are only keeping busy." Camps became classrooms of irony. Guards never lectured. They didn't need to. Bread, soda, pie, those were lessons sharper than speeches. Every meal was a chalk mark, every Coke cap a punctuation. Newsreels rubbed the truth in. Prisoners saw Liberty ships sliding into water every week, each loaded with tanks, trucks, crates. They saw aircraft factories with wings stacked like firewood. They saw women in coveralls, rivet guns sparking, smiling at cameras. Germans laughed bitterly at first. Women building planes, but laughter died when the scale filled the screen. In Germany, boys carved rifles from wood. In America, mothers built bombers while children licked ice cream. A prisoner muttered in the dark, "We were not defeated in battle. We were defeated by breakfast." The word spread through barracks, half a joke, half confession. The irony of trust gnawed deeper. Guards left prisoners in orchards, in canneries, even near highways. Few ran. Where could they go? Into a land drowning in plenty? Into cities that glowed with neon? Escape was impossible, not because of fences, but because America was too large to flee. One officer admitted later, "The strangest lesson was that they trusted us. They left us in fields and we stayed, because they were strong enough to be careless." By late 1944, men stopped asking if the food would end. It never did. Instead, they asked how it was possible. How could a nation fight across oceans, drop fleets of bombers, and still flood camps with bread, meat, and soda? No answer came. Only more trains, more ovens, more bottles, and every night, as lights flickered in towns beyond the wire, prisoners whispered the same thought. Perhaps the war was already over, not because of armies or battles, but because of scale. The bottle became a symbol sharper than wire. Dark glass, curved, sweating in the sun. Guards handed them out casually, caps hissing, fizz rising. Prisoners lifted them to their lips as if in a ritual. Some drank with greedy gulps, others sipped slowly, stretching sweetness as if it were sacred. A few refused at first. But thirst and the sound of caps snapping always won. One man swore he would never touch it. "Poison," he spat. 3 days later, heat broke him. He twisted the cap, hissed, drank. Another smashed his bottle against the wall, shards scattering. He whispered, "This is not soda. This is defeat." Coca-Cola traveled farther than rifles. Newsreels showed American soldiers in North Africa, in Italy, on Pacific Islands, bottles in hand, smiling at cameras. The same bottles prisoners held. The message was cruelly simple. America had so much sugar, so much glass, so much labor, it could sweeten both fronts and camps without noticing. One machinist prisoner counted the bottles rolling from a line at a bottling plant. 40,000 in one shift. He shook his head. In Germany, a factory would halt for lack of sugar. Here, sugar falls like rain. Numbers piled up like cans on conveyors. America harvested wheat enough in Kansas alone to feed entire nations. Stockyards in Chicago slaughtered 10,000 hogs per day. Dairies produced more than 100 billion pounds of milk annually. These were not rumors anymore. Prisoners saw the proof in fields, barns, and mess halls. Each figure was a knife twisting deeper. Letters home made it unbearable. A wife wrote, "We boil weeds. The children cough." A mother confessed, "We share crusts. The little one cries at night." Prisoners folded the paper, unable to reply. On their tables stood bowls of beef stew, cups of milk, bottles of soda. Some pushed plates away, appetite soured by shame. Others ate anyway. Hunger always wins. In barracks, men argued in low voices. Was this strategy? Propaganda? A calculated weapon? Propaganda doesn't fizz, one said bitterly. Another muttered, the real message is that they don't even see us. They give because they can. Silence followed. That truth was harder than wire. Canteens turned coupons into temptation. Soap, tobacco, razor blades, yes, but also chocolate, pie, ice cream. A man saved wages for weeks, then bought a Hershey bar. He unwrapped it slowly, broke a square, and thought of his daughter licking empty pots. He chewed, eyes wet. Another laughed and devoured the whole bar in seconds. Guilt swallowed with sweetness. Every act of abundance carried irony. To Germans, candy was treasure. To Americans, it was casual. The gap was not only in calories, but in meaning. One officer muttered, "We are not prisoners of war. We are prisoners of scale." Coca-Cola cut deepest because it was frivolous. Bread sustained, milk nourished, meat strengthened. But soda, pure sugar, pure indulgence, fizzing for a second, then gone. That a nation at war could waste resources on bubbles and still give bottles to captives was beyond comprehension. Some carried empty bottles under mattresses, proof of the unreal. Others mailed them home as tokens, smuggled through censors. Families back in Germany held the glass, stared, and wept. The bottle said more than letters ever could. Rumors twisted the knife further. Guards joked that the company promised every American soldier 5 cents Coke anywhere in the world. Some prisoners believed it, others scoffed. But then they saw crates rolling toward ports, saw ads plastered in towns, saw soldiers overseas raising bottles. Belief returned. The shame turned inward. One prisoner stared at his reflection in a Coke bottle. Distorted, wavy, he whispered, "My children go hungry. I drink sugar water." Another refused to write home, afraid his words would betray the truth. He said nothing, ate quietly, and hated the taste. The irony spread into music. Radios blared swing and jazz, crooners singing of love, of joy, of futures. Germans who had grown up on brass and drums felt rhythm seep into their bones. Feet tapped against will. A guard laughed. "You boys move better to Benny Goodman than to Hitler." No one answered. The contrast with Germany was savage. Civilians rationed to crusts, cities burning under bombs, families scattered. Here, captives gained weight. Some even grew rosy-cheeked. Rumors back home called them liars. But photographs taken years later confirmed it. German prisoners in America looked healthier than civilians outside. By late 1944, the conclusion was unavoidable. The bread, the milk, the meat, the bottles. It was not trickery, not temporary. It was America itself. Endless food, endless sweetness, endless trust. And the question sharpened. How could a nation fight across oceans, arm millions, build fleets and bombers, and still hand chocolate and soda to its captives? The barracks fell silent. No answer came. Only another cap hissed, another loaf steamed, another train roared past. The nights were worse than the days. In the fields and canneries there was work to dull thought. But at night, under the low hum of insects and the distant whistle of trains, men lay awake, staring at rafters. Questions pounded louder than machinery. One whispered, "What if Germany has already lost?" Silence followed, thicker than the dark. Another hissed, "Shut up!" But the seed was planted. Letters fueled the fear. A wife scrawled, "We boil weeds. The children cough." A brother wrote from Dresden, "The sky rains fire." One man folded the paper again and again until it tore in his hands. Another tucked his under a straw pillow, fingers brushing it in the dark like a relic. Meanwhile, the mess hall never thinned. Beef stew steaming, loaves of white bread stacked in baskets, Bottles of Coca-Cola sweating in crates. Guards joked, tossed caps, lit cigarettes. For them it was routine. For Germans it was unbearable contrast. A prisoner stared at his bowl. "My wife boils weeds. I eat meat." He spooned it up anyway. Hunger always wins. Then shame followed slower. Debates flared in the dark. A machinist muttered, "They feed us to break us." Another shook his head. "Propaganda doesn't fizz when you open it." A third whispered, "The worst part is they don't even see us. This is nothing to them." Silence pressed harder than wire. Rumors crawled across bunks. Kansas alone, they said, harvested wheat enough to feed all of France. Liberty ships slid into water once a week. Bomber plants turned out 4 planes an hour. Numbers blurred. But the meaning was sharp. Abundance itself was a weapon. Quiet images cut deepest. One man lay awake, fingering the cap of an empty Coke bottle under his pillow. Another pressed his wife's letter flat against his chest until sweat soaked the ink. A third stared at the ceiling, lips moving soundlessly, reciting rations back home. 300 grams bread, 30 grams meat, a spoon of sugar. He counted again. Then he laughed, bitter and low. The guards never preached. They didn't need to. Bread, soda, chocolate, each was a sermon sharper than words. Every hiss of a cap, every slice of pie, every town glowing beyond the fence was a line in scripture no German wanted to read. Escape became a joke. Guards left them in orchards, in barns, even near highways. Few ran. Where could they go? Into cornfields that swallowed the horizon, into cities glowing with neon. The barbed wire did not hold them. The abundance did. One officer said later, "We did not escape because escape meant less, not more." And in the quiet, the question sharpened. How could a nation fight across oceans, build fleets and bombers daily, and still flood its camps with food, sugar, and light? How could men behind wire live better than their own families at home? No answer came. Only the hiss of another cap, the whistle of another train, and the silence of men who no longer believed in victory. By winter, pride cracked loud enough to hear. Officers who once barked orders now sat silent in bunks, eyes hollow. One finally muttered, "Better a prisoner here than starving free." No one answered. They didn't dare. Another officer confessed he dreamed not of home, but of camp meals. White bread, thick stew, soda hissing in the dark. He buried his face in his hands. Letters made it worse. A wife begged, "Send soap. We wash clothes in rainwater." A mother wrote, "The child asks for milk. I cannot lie anymore." One prisoner folded the page until it shrank to scraps. Another tore his into strips, chewing the paper as if that could erase the words. Meanwhile, the canteen overflowed. Coupons turned into tobacco, candy, chocolate. A Hershey bar cost a week's wage. Men still saved. One unwrapped slowly, broke off a square, placed it on his tongue like sacrament. He whispered, "She will never believe me." Another laughed, shoved the whole bar in his mouth, chewed fast, and spat the wrapper on the floor. Coca-Cola cut deepest. Factories spat out 40,000 bottles a shift. Sugar by the ton, glass by the truckload. Guards handed them out as casually as water. To prisoners, each hiss was humiliation. One swore he'd never touch it. Heat broke him in 3 days. He twisted the cap, drank, and said nothing. A machinist counted bottles rolling past. He muttered, "Germany counts calories. America counts bubbles." The line stuck, whispered across bunks until it became truth. Numbers mocked them everywhere. 10,000 hogs slaughtered daily in Chicago. 1 billion cans of meat sealed in a single year. Dairies pouring out 100 billion pounds of milk. Each fact was a nail, each statistic another laugh at scarcity. Some carried empty bottles under mattresses, proof it wasn't a dream. Others mailed them home as trophies, smuggled past censors. Families held the glass, stared and wept. The bottle said more than any letter. The irony of trust gnawed sharper. Guards left them in fields with little watch. Few ran. Where would they go? Into corn that swallowed horizons? Into towns lit by neon? Stores stacked with pies? One officer admitted later, the wire was thin. The land itself was the cage. Nights grew crueler. Men whispered confessions into the dark. I dread release. I don't want to go back. Shame soaked the bunks heavier than sweat. And always the bottle hissed. Coca-Cola was not food, not fuel, not necessity. It was luxury turned into weapon. The bubbles mocked the war. One man smashed his against the wall, shards glittering on the floor. Another kissed the glass before hiding it away. Both knew the meaning. America was so strong it could waste sweetness and still win. By 1945, the shock had turned into reflection. The trains still roared past, the ovens still glowed, the bottles still hissed. But Germans no longer gasped. They stared, silent, trying to make sense of it. Abundance was no longer a spectacle. It was a mirror showing them what their world lacked. In the barracks, conversation shifted. Not, will it end, but what comes after. One machinist asked, if Germany loses, what will be left? Another whispered, maybe this is what will be left. He gestured to the bread, the milk, the bottles lined like soldiers on the table. Men laughed nervously, but the thought hung heavy. Radio made it worse. Swing still blared, crooners still sang, baseball games rattled from distant speakers. Guards turned dials, volume rising, and prisoners listened even when they pretended not to. One officer muttered, this is not music. This is confidence made sound. Another whispered, it is freedom with a drumbeat. Small acts showed the fracture. A prisoner caught himself humming a tune from a newsreel. He froze, looked around, and cursed under his breath. Another asked a guard about baseball rules, then argued with bunkmates about teams he'd never seen. One even traded coupons for a glove, practicing throws against a wall at dusk. The irony was savage. The enemy's culture slipped in like smoke. They hated it, feared it, yet breathed it anyway. Food, too, changed its meaning. At first, bread mocked. Now it felt like certainty. At first, soda humiliated. Now it tasted like a promise. Men debated in hushed tones. Was America strong because of its weapons, or because it wasted sweetness and never noticed? One prisoner admitted quietly, the war is already over. We live in the future, and it is here. Letters from Germany cut like knives. Wives wrote of hunger, of ruins, of children coughing in cellars. Prisoners stared at their own hands, rough from work, but full from meals, and said nothing. Guilt gnawed sharper than hunger ever had. One whispered, I hope they never know how well we ate. Others argued the opposite, that survival was all that mattered. If we return alive, we carry proof. Bread, bottles, lights, machines, proof that another world exists. He was shouted down. No one wanted to admit it, but they all listened. The paradox grew unbearable. Barbed wire meant captivity, yet inside it men ate better, slept safer, lived fuller than families back home. Beyond the fence lay freedom and ruins. Inside lay prison and abundance. One officer wrote later, it was the cruelest joke. To be captive in paradise while our people starved in hell. Winter turned into spring, and with it came a strange calm. The guards no longer felt like shadows. They smoked, joked, handed out bottles, and sometimes even spoke to prisoners as if to neighbors. One asked a machinist about his trade, nodding with real interest. Another tossed a baseball to a group, laughing when they fumbled the catch. The distance shrank, though the wire still stood. In barracks, conversations changed tone. Less shouting, less denial, more quiet philosophy. One night a man whispered, "We were not beaten by weapons. We were beaten by bread." The sentence echoed until it stuck, repeated like scripture. Another added, "Bullets killed men. Bread killed belief." No one laughed. Small rituals grew around food. Bread was sliced thicker, soda shared in silence, chocolate divided into tiny squares. Men who once smashed bottles now saved them, lined under bunks like trophies. The glass glinted in lantern light, each one a reminder that sweetness could outlast steel. Even officers bent. One who had sworn never to eat American pie bought a slice at the canteen and devoured it in 2 bites. Another, who scorned Coca-Cola as humiliation, was caught sipping from a bottle in the shadows. No one mocked him. They all understood. Letters kept coming, thin and desperate. A wife begged for shoes, writing, "The children's feet bleed." A mother pleaded, "The cellar is damp. The little one coughs all night." Prisoners read, folded, hid the words, and then sat in silence before steaming bowls of stew. The shame was heavier than hunger ever had been. Some argued it was mercy. Others called it cruelty sharper than chains. "Better to starve than to eat while they suffer," one muttered. But he still cleaned his bowl. Hunger always wins. Quiet moments struck harder than sermons. One man sat outside, staring at the glow of a small town beyond the fence. Shop windows lit, cars moving, neon buzzing faintly. He whispered, "They live in tomorrow. We rot in yesterday." Another stood by a field, watching farmers plow with tractors while children chased each other in the grass. He muttered, "Our children crawl through rubble. Theirs run in sunlight." Radio added its own cruelty. Crooners sang of love, of summer nights, of promises. Germans who had buried comrades in frozen mud listened to songs about ice cream and laughter. The rhythm seeped in anyway. Feet tapped, heads nodded, even as pride burned. A guard smirked. "You boys march better to swing than to drums." Silence followed. He was right. The paradox sharpened. America trusted them more than Germany ever had. Guards left them in orchards and barns, even near highways. Few tried to run. The land itself was the prison, too vast, too bright, too abundant to escape. One officer confessed later, "The wire was thin, the land was stronger than chains." In the quiet, men began to think of futures. Not victory, no one spoke that word anymore, but survival. A machinist said, "If we return alive, we bring proof. Proof that another world exists." He was not shouted down this time. Others nodded, eyes down. They began to see abundance not just as humiliation, but as revelation. If food could be endless, if light could shine even in war, then perhaps life itself could be different after the fighting ended. It was a dangerous thought. Hope, born inside captivity. And yet the guilt never faded. Men still whispered, "I hope they never know how well we ate." They feared release almost as much as they longed for it. By spring, the debates were over. No one argued that the bread would run out. It never did. No one claimed the soda was a trick. The hiss was too real. No one promised victory. Even the officers stayed quiet. Pride had drained away, leaving something heavier. Resignation. Men no longer asked, "When will this end?" Instead, they whispered, "What comes after?" A machinist leaned back on his bunk, staring at the rafters. "If Germany survives, it will be small. If we survive, we will carry proof." He tapped a Coke bottle under his bed with his boot. The glass rattled. "This. Bread, milk, light. Proof another world exists, another whispered. Our weapons failed. Their food didn't. The words settled like ash. No one contradicted him. Small details betrayed the shift. A man once proud of his uniform now hummed jazz under his breath. Another traded coupons for a baseball glove and practiced against the barracks wall. A third wrote home, carefully omitting food, describing only work and weather, afraid his words would wound more than bombs. Shame was constant. One prisoner dreamed of his wife boiling weeds, woke to the smell of bread, and wept into his blanket. Another bit into chocolate, then spat it out, furious at the sweetness. But he picked it up again, wiped it, and finished the bar. Hunger always wins. The paradox grew unbearable. Captivity meant abundance. Freedom back home meant ruins. Men dreaded release as much as they longed for it. One whispered, "Better a captive here than starving free." Silence followed. No one argued. Coca-Cola became a relic. Empty bottles lined bunks like shrines. Some kissed the glass before sleep, proof of sweetness in a world built on fire. Others smashed them, shards glinting in lantern light. But either way, the message was clear. Soda had become a weapon sharper than bullets. Newsreels twisted the knife deeper. Liberty ships sliding weakly into water. Bombers rolling off lines by the hour. Soldiers overseas laughing with bottles in hand. The same bottles, prisoners clutched in silence. The projector flickered, and one muttered, "They fight with steel and sugar. We fight with scraps." The guards never needed to say a word. The lesson was in the hiss of caps, the glow of neon beyond the wire, the endless bread baskets. Every sound, every smell, every taste preached one truth. America was endless, and Germans, once certain of destiny, now whispered a different creed. We were not defeated by armies. We were defeated by breakfast. The phrase spread, repeated until it became fact. Men laughed when they said it, but the laughter was thin, broken. It was the only explanation that fit. In the end, the barbed wire was not the cage. The land was. The abundance was. America itself was. And in the stillness, with bellies full and hearts hollow, the same question circled endlessly. How could a nation fight across oceans, arm millions, build fleets and bombers daily, and still give sweetness to its captives? No answer came. Only another train, another loaf, another bottle hissing in the dark. By the last months of captivity, the shock had hardened into memory. The bread still steamed in baskets. The soda still hissed. The canteen still stacked pies as if war did not exist. But Germans no longer gawked. They studied. Every slice, every bottle, every neon light beyond the fence became evidence. One machinist kept a notebook hidden under his mattress. He did not write words, only numbers. 40,000 bottles in a shift. 10,000 hogs in a day. One Liberty ship a week. The pages filled until he ran out of space. He muttered, "History is not written with speeches. It is written with quantities." Others collected objects instead. Empty Coke bottles lined under bunks like relics. Chocolate wrappers folded into neat squares. Pie tins stacked like medals. A guard laughed once, pointing at the shrine of trash. No one answered. To prisoners, those scraps spoke louder than orders. Quiet scenes cut deeper than numbers. One man held his wife's letter so long the paper thinned under his fingers. Another kept a crust of German bread wrapped in cloth, mold spreading across it, proof of scarcity carried like a wound. A third sat outside at dusk staring at a baseball rolling slowly against a wall, listening to children laugh beyond the fence. The paradox grew sharper. Captivity fed them. Freedom starved their families. A soldier whispered, I will go home heavier than I arrived. Another spat back, and they will go thinner. Silence swallowed the bunkhouse. Radio pressed the wound wider. Swing still blared. Crooners still sang. Baseball scores rattled out like weather reports. One officer muttered, "They don't announce victories. They announce games." Another added, "That is power. To make music louder than war." The canteen mocked them with choice. Tobacco, soap, chocolate, pie, ice cream. Coupons slid across counters like currency in a world that never noticed shortage. One prisoner bought soap and sent it home, hidden in a package. Another mailed only an empty Coke bottle. Both gestures cut the same. Proof of a life Germany could no longer imagine. Numbers piled higher. By 1945, America had produced over 2 billion cans of food. Shipyards had launched more than 2,700 Liberty ships. Aircraft factories had rolled out 96,000 planes in a single year. Germans stared, silent. One whispered, "We count losses. They count outputs." Short phrases turned into creed. Bread beat bullets. Jazz marched louder than drums. The cage was abundance, not wire. Each was passed along like gospel, whispered into bunks, scratched on walls, carried in memory. And yet guilt never loosened its grip. One man admitted he feared going home. "What will I say when they ask if I was hungry?" Another whispered, "Better they hate me for silence than know I ate pie." The paradox was final. They dreaded release almost as much as they longed for it. Spring brought rumors sharper than wire. News drifted in from guards, from newspapers left on benches, from half-heard radios. Berlin surrounded. The Führer in a bunker. Capitulation soon. Each word landed heavier than bombs. Men sat on bunks, silent, hands folded. For years they had argued about victory. Now no one said the word. Letters confirmed what they feared. A mother wrote, "The cellar collapsed. The little one did not come out." A wife confessed, "We line up for hours for bread. Sometimes there is none." A brother admitted, "We burn furniture to keep warm." Prisoners stared at the paper until the ink blurred with tears. Then they folded the letters and hid them, as if silence could erase them. Meanwhile, camp life went on. Bread arrived, milk poured, Coca-Cola hissed. The paradox grew crueler. The war ended in ruins, but inside the wire, life went on with pies and music. One man whispered, "The world is upside down. Our freedom starves. Our captivity feeds." Another spat, "Better their cages than our cellars." No one laughed. Quiet scenes told the truth. A prisoner polished his boots every night, though he never wore them outside. Another kept a Hershey wrapper folded in his pocket, touching it like a charm. A third hummed Swing softly, then stopped, ashamed, glancing around the bunkhouse. Numbers haunted them. In the last year, America had produced over 20 million tons of steel. Railroads hauled 700 million tons of freight. Even in April 1945, factories still turned out thousands of trucks and planes. A machinist muttered, "They never slowed, not once. We lost the moment we rationed." Short phrases hardened into scripture. "We lost to breakfast, not to bombs. They trust more than we fear. Our ruins cannot compete with their trash." Each was bitter, but no one denied them. Fear shifted toward release. Men who once longed for freedom now whispered dreading words. What will we see at home? Will there be a home? What do I tell my children when they ask what I ate here? One officer muttered, "Silence is the only survival." Another added, "Better to be hated for secrets than cursed for truth." The wire no longer looked like prison. It looked like protection from what lay beyond. Ruins, hunger, ash. A machinist stared at the fence at dusk and whispered, I am safer inside than outside. And in the evenings, as guards tossed baseballs, as radios played swing, as bottles hissed open, Germans realized the cruelest irony. Captivity had become refuge. The news arrived not with drums, but with a murmur. A guard carried a newspaper under his arm, folded once, headlines in black. Germany surrenders. He laid it on a bench without a word. Prisoners gathered slowly, necks craning, eyes scanning the letters. Silence spread wider than cheers ever could. For years they had argued, hoped, denied. Now there was nothing left to say. One machinist whispered, "So it is done." Another muttered, "Not victory, only ending." No one corrected him. Meals continued that day, as always. Bread steamed, stew thickened, Coca-Cola hissed. But men ate slowly, as if each bite was betrayal. A prisoner stared at his spoon and whispered, "They surrender in ruins. We eat in abundance." He put the spoon down, then picked it up again. Hunger still won. Quiet scenes told the story better than headlines. One man tore his letter from home into pieces, as if the war had erased the words. Another pressed a Hershey wrapper flat under his palm, staring at it like a relic. A third simply wept into his bread, silent, tears soaking the crust. Numbers haunted the silence. Reports whispered through the camp. 3.5 million homes destroyed across Germany. Cities burned, from Hamburg to Dresden. 10 million displaced. Over 6 million soldiers dead. The machinist scratched figures into his notebook, then slammed it shut. No numbers left to count. Yet America's machine still roared. Even as surrender was signed, factories produced thousands of trucks, millions of cans of food, hundreds of bombers. A prisoner muttered, "They could fight 10 more wars. We cannot feed one winter." Short phrases hardened into creed. We surrendered long before the paper. Defeat was written in bread, not in ink. They ended us with abundance. Fear shifted toward the future. One whispered, "What will we find when we go back?" Another added, "Or who?" Silence pressed harder than wire. The paradox remained. Captivity meant food, safety, light. Release meant hunger, rubble, ash. Men dreaded the day the gates would open. And as the camp lights flickered on that night, brighter than any German city still standing, prisoners understood the cruelest irony. The war had ended, but their captivity had become the only place where life continued. After the newspaper, after the silence, came the waiting. Rumors circled like flies. Trains will come. We'll be sent back by summer. Some to England first, some to France. No one knew. Guards shrugged. Papers gave no dates. The uncertainty gnawed sharper than hunger. Men who had once longed for release now whispered their dread. What will be left of our towns? What will my children look like? Will they even know me? The questions piled higher than wire. Quiet scenes revealed the fear. One man polished his boots every night, though he knew he might walk only through rubble. Another wrote letters he never sent. Pages filled with apologies. I ate while you starved. I lived while you hid. A third sat outside at dusk, staring at the horizon as if he could see the ruins from across the ocean. Numbers spread like shadows. Reports said 20% of Germany's housing destroyed, railways in ruins, industry cut to half. Refugees counted in millions, children starving by the hundreds of thousands. The machinist with the notebook stopped writing. Too many zeros, he muttered. Meanwhile, America's abundance never slowed. Cans stacked higher, trains rolled longer, ships launched weekly. A prisoner whispered, "They feed us while they rebuild the world." Another spat, "We are not released because we are not needed. We are irrelevant." Short phrases hardened into creed. Release is exile. Freedom is rubble. Better captive in abundance than free in ash. The irony deepened. Men began to fear not starvation, but survival. If I return fatter than I left, what will my wife think? One whispered. Another muttered, if my children died hungry while I drank soda, how can I face them? No answer came. Only silence. Only the hiss of bottles, the smell of bread, the glow of lights. Some tried to prepare. A group rehearsed what to say. We were treated poorly. We starved. We suffered. They laughed bitterly, knowing it was a lie they might need to tell. Another group swore to keep silent forever, to bury the truth of pies and chocolate under years of shame. The paradox sharpened. They dreaded the train more than the wire. One machinist whispered, we surrendered twice, first to their armies, then to their abundance. The train will not free us. It will expose us. And in the barracks that night, as neon hummed in the distance and bread cooled in baskets, Germans realized the cruelest truth. They had survived, but survival itself was the heaviest burden. The trains came late. For weeks, men watched the horizon, listening for whistles, waiting for orders. Bread still steamed, bottles still hissed, radios still sang. But every sound felt borrowed, as if the abundance was counting down. One morning, guards posted a list, names scribbled in columns. Men pressed forward, eyes scanning, hearts sinking. Those chosen packed quietly, folding what little they had. A letter, a wrapper, a bottle cap, treasures in a world of steel and sugar. Quiet scenes told the truth. One man kissed a Coke bottle before leaving it under his bunk. Another tore his last Hershey wrapper in two, giving half to a friend. A third sat on his bed, staring at a pair of boots he had polished every night, knowing they would step only into ruins. Numbers whispered, even here. Reports said millions more refugees crowded across Germany, hunger killing faster than winter. Yet in camp, milk still poured, stew still thickened, crates still clinked. A prisoner muttered, the war ended for them. It never ended for us. Short phrases hardened into creed. Departure is punishment. The cage was paradise. Better prisoner in abundance than free in famine? The irony twisted sharper as the gates opened. Guards shook hands, some even wished luck. Prisoners stepped through wire not with cheers, but with dread. One whispered, freedom tastes of ash. Another added, our sentence begins where captivity ends. On the last night before departure, silence filled the barracks. No songs, no jokes, only the faint hum of neon from the town beyond. A machinist broke it at last. We were not defeated in battle. We were defeated in bread, in light, in sweetness. And tomorrow we must carry that defeat home. No one answered. The lamps flickered. Bottles hissed. A train wailed somewhere beyond the fields. And the same question circled endlessly, unanswered, unbroken. How could a nation feed its captives with sugar and light, while their own families starved in ruins?